This podcast may contain explicit language. If you lose this war, don't blame me. The General is next. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
And tonight, for our 299th episode, we discuss the Civil War action comedy, you got that right, action comedy, The General. Technically from 1927, although it originally premiered in Tokyo to limited crowds in 1926. Celebrating its 99th anniversary because apparently I didn't look closely enough, even though it technically debuted in 1926. It came out in February of 27. So we have another one of these weird adjustments at the beginning of the year, and you'll have to forgive me. Anyway, written and directed by Buster Keaton and Clyde Bruckman, with Al Boasberg and Charles Smith. Cinematography by Devereaux Jennings and Burt Haynes. Music by William P. Perry. Editing by Buster Keaton and Sherman Kell, starring Buster Keaton, would you know it, as Johnnie Gray, Marion Mack as Annabelle Lee, Glenn Cavender as Union Captain Anderson, Jim Farley as General Thatcher, Frederick Vroom, and that is his real name apparently, Vroom, as a Confederate general, Charles Smith as Annabelle's father, Frank Barnes as Annabelle's brother, Joe Keaton as a Union general, Mike Domlin as a Union general, and Tom Nawn as a Union general. They were really creative with their character names back in 1926. Anyway, background for the movie quickly here. The General was wide released in the United States on February 5th, 1927, making this its 99th anniversary. On a budget of $750,000, The General is estimated to have grossed $1 million in ticket sales, although the breakout of receipts was more gloomy in the moment. It also failed to please critics at the time, with many claiming it to be unfunny, unable to stay in a particular lane, and a general flop. Nevertheless, in the decades afterward, it has received widespread critical acclaim as a seminal work of the silent era. The General was a favorite film of American filmmaker Orson Welles. Welles said that The General was, quote, the greatest comedy ever made, the greatest Civil War film ever made, and perhaps the greatest film ever made. In the decennial Sight and Sound poll of the greatest films ever made, international critics ranked The General number 8 in 1972 and number 10 in 1982. In the 2012 poll, it was ranked 34th by the critics and 75th by the directors. Dave Whitaker of Dave's Movie Database, a film aggregator site that combines other lists with box office ratings and awards, lists The General as the 99th greatest movie of all time, the 21st greatest comedy, and the 3rd greatest silent film. Sarah, since you are a big silent film era fan, what are the two that might have been listed ahead of it?
Why can't I think of the title of the movie? We watched it together in 2020.
We watched neither of these together, I'm pretty sure. Seeing as I've never seen one of them.
Okay. I know we watched Gold Rush together. I don't think it's that one.
It is not neither of these films is a Chaplin film.
Okay, so I might guess Wings as one of them.
That's not bad, but it was the other Best Picture winner of that year in Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, that we have discussed previously on the show. The other one, Metropolis.
Oh.
I love Metropolis. I didn't even think about that.
Anyway.
At some point, I'm going to get you to watch it.
The film was recognized by the American Film Institute on the following lists. AFI's 100 Years, 100 Laughs at number 18, and it was on AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies 10th Anniversary Edition, going from completely off the list to number 18. In 1989, The General was selected for preservation in the initial class in the United States National Film Registry. The General currently holds a 92% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, an 81 score on Metacritic, and a 4.2 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Now, of course, we can't do this by ourselves, so as I've already alluded to, we bring in our returning celebrity guest, my little sister, and our first ever guest on the show, making her 10th appearance on the show to date and earning her t-shirt, which I think you might already have, maybe?
I do.
Yeah. The digging dynamo who loves the silent era, please welcome back Sarah Duncan.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be back.
I can't recall immediately. Was the last time you were on All Quiet on the Western Front?
Yes, it was.
That seems right. And I think that was 275. So you're almost 25 episodes apart. And usually we try in every 25 episodes or so discuss one of the bigger films. I think originally I had this planned to be our 300th and I miscounted somewhere. So it's unofficially our 299th episode. But welcome back nonetheless. We'll still be covering Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, which I think counts as a seminal classic next week for our 300th film. A little bit of a different pace from our 250th episode, which was Schindler's List.
Yeah.
Moving on. So, The General tonight is a film I have now seen twice. I have maintained, after having seen this and only this from Buster Keaton, that I enjoy Keaton much more than I do Chaplin. For whatever reason, and we discussed this a couple of weeks ago on City Lights, Chaplin just does not quite have the same appeal to me. His shtick feels, I don't know, dated or a little bit more unfunny. And there are enough sight gags in this film, which, again, I'm a critic of a lot of slapstick humor and stuff that's physical comedy. But for whatever reason, a lot of the stuff in this movie works for me. So what are the other relationships between the two of you for this movie?
Well, I personally had never seen this until we started the preparation for the show, but in preparing for the show, I did actually watch it twice. I try to do that with a lot of silent films, as I feel like it provides a better understanding of the film. I do enjoy Keaton. You are right, he's very different to Charlie Chaplin. They have very different senses of comedic timing, which I think, as much as I love Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton does, I feel, resonate more with the modern audience to an extent, because he does have more of what I would call a modern timing. This is the only thing that I've seen in him as well, though.
Dad, I think you said that you saw this specific movie before you have finalized your Cinema Legacy poll submission that you did last fall. What made you put this on at the time?
Because I watched it and thought it was brilliantly done. And
well, I meant, what made you put this on in the first place? Not put it on your list. Because I don't think you put it on your full list.
I think it just fell short. I think it was just under the 50. I think it was like 54, 54, 55, something like that. I'd have to go back and look. I tried to get it on, but I just couldn't justify it. Well, it was something I had never seen. And I had seen a lot of other silent films. Well, not a lot, but, probably 10, 11, 12, something like that. And so I thought, well, I'm going to watch this because I really had never seen anything with Buster Keaton in it before. So I decided to watch it, and I was glad I did because I enjoyed the film. And as far as the timing Sarah mentions, this is the difference between Chaplin coming off of acting versus Keaton coming out of vaudeville.
Okay, you might have to explain that more because I don't understand where you're going with that.
Vaudeville, he was filming his ability or his comedy for an audience, whereas Chaplin was performing and did not really have the connection or have an idea of how to connect with an audience per se. So his was much more flat as far as comedy goes, in my opinion, because Keaton knew what an audience would find funny. He could present it and time it and do it in a way that would ring truer with audiences because of of his experience in vaudeville. If you look at any of the great radio and early film comedians in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, a lot of them started out in vaudeville. It's kind of like why now so many comedians and comedic actors start out as stand-up comic or comedians, because they get a sense of timing, they get a sense of understanding and playing against an audience and knowing what works and what doesn't by feel.
But that's not an apt comparison. What I would say, as far as comedic actors, and it's not like stand-ups making the transition into comedic acting, there aren't a whole lot of them. Like, there are actors who made the transition into doing stand-up, and some of that has worked. But honestly, if you're looking for the apt comparison from going to vaudeville to the screen, I would say it's those that are in sketch comedy that have made the leap to comedic acting. Because there's a lot more sketch comedians that have gone on to acting or comedic acting success, Steve Carell, for example, then there aren't necessarily stand-up comedians that went on to be great actors. So for every Adam Sandler, I mean, there's a Nate Bargatze who he's a good stand-up, but he's not necessarily a great actor. And I know it's hit or miss for people on like Kevin Hart and whether or not he's an actually good comedic actor. He's kind of polarizing because some people think he's funny and some people don't. But point taken. Either way, this is not the Buster Keaton film that made the final Cinema Legacy poll list. That was Sherlock Jr., which we'll be discussing, I think, in 2028. I have not seen that one to this point. And as I mentioned before, this is the only Keaton film that I have seen to this point. I enjoy this film. I think it was a little less on the second time through for me. The first time I watched it was as a completionary journey through the AFI Top 100 back in 2020 when I was watching a ton of stuff just to check it off of my list overall. But I still think that comparative to some of the other Chaplins, where especially like the Gold Rush does nothing for me. City Lights, I came around on it in some spots, but if we're really going to discuss a Chaplin, the one that I feel that I have the strongest connection to is the one we'll discuss next week in Modern Times. So let me pose this question, and we've been discussing a lot of this early era of film, 1920s, the 1930s, and the silent era more specifically, kind of to open up this season. Is Buster Keaton the best comedic actor, which I think he has at least... I think you'd probably hold up him or it's Chaplin of this era. I think Chaplin is much more iconic and well known by the average person today, but I think Keaton, in my opinion, might be a better comedic actor, as I've already mentioned. And is he also the best action star of the silent era?
As far as action star, Douglas Fairbanks Sr.
How could he do such amazing stunts with such tiny feet?
I know. So he would, I would say, probably be the more action star. As far as comedic actor, I would rank Keaton probably one, but I would want to have, I guess I'd like to see more of his work before I make that. But I really have always loved Harold Lloyd.
I personally have seen a lot of Chaplin's films, as this being the only one of Keaton's that I've seen. I'd have a hard time saying that, he's the best comedic actor of the era. I also haven't seen outside of Chaplin that many silent film comedies, so maybe I need to broaden that just a bit.
Let me suggest the movie Intolerance. That is a absolute gut buster of a comedy.
Okay.
Good old D.W. Griffith.
Of what I've seen, I think he's a phenomenal, and I would probably rank him as one of the top action stars of the silent era, personally.
Well, because he does so many unique stunts And I've seen clips of this here floating around on YouTube or Twitter or whatever of him trying to put together certain action set pieces or stunt work that he's doing himself and how inventive he was with a lot of his stuff. I can't say much to anything that I've seen with Harold Lloyd just because I have no personal experience with him. But I think compared to Chaplin, where it was much more of a caricature, and so it was kind of more of a grounded thing, Keaton is much more daring in how far he wants to go for the physical gag.
I mean, honestly, I have a hard time ranking him as one of the top comedians, but one of the things that I will say about him is not that he's just daring, but he's ultimately incredibly creative. Even just that moment where he's clearing the train tracks of these large logs that are being dropped by the Union spies, and he goes to pick one up and it's stuck, and he's sliding up the train and he uses one log to tip the other out of the way. Like, who in their right mind is going to think to do that or something like that when you're stuck in a last minute situation? He's just he was one of the ultimate like beginning creators of this type of comedy that I think has spread since.
A lot of what he did was insane.
Yeah.
Because jumping from the engine to the tender car to the box car of a moving train, if he slips and falls, he's dead. It's not like they had safety technicians who were overseeing the stunts to make sure they were going to be done properly and safely.
So I have an anecdote for later, but he really did fire a cannonball out of that gigantic cannon that landed in the car or the engine area. Like, that's the level of stunt work where he's taking some really daring chances.
Yeah.
Dad, do you have our plot summary ready for us?
I do. The General is a silent comedy set during the American Civil War, starring Buster Keaton as Johnnie Gray, a devoted railroad engineer who cares more about his locomotive, called the General, than anything else. When Union spies steal his train, Johnny sets off on a daring chase through enemy territory, using quick thinking, physical comedy, and sheer determination to get it back. Along the way, Johnny also tries to prove his courage to his sweetheart, Annabelle Lee, played by Marion Mack, after being rejected by the Confederate Army.
Thank you, Dad. So what is the film about?
I would argue that the film is a retelling about this crazy kind of train chase of the Union Army stealing this locomotive that they just tried to set in a much more relatable way. I mean, it was adapted originally from a book all about this attempt by the Union Army to burn down all of these bridges so that it made the Confederate Army completely unable to resupply themselves. And so it is this story that is kind of a little crazy and a little bit fun of, you know, trying to watch these people track this down before it becomes the ultimate end of the war.
It is based on an actual story that did happen, although I don't know if it's quite in the manner that you're talking about. You're focusing much more entirely on the plot than anything else having to do with, I guess, the thematic elements of this. And this question is about the thematic elements. So I would posit that since there's very little dialogue and a larger encompassing story, the only thing thematically I could take from this is it's a guy who wants his cake and wants to eat it too. He has two loves in his life. One is clearly superior to the other, but he doesn't want to give up either.
It's a love story. He loves the train and he's trying to protect and save the train, but by the same token, if it happens that he's able to prove his worth to his girl, okay, I'll do that too.
It's like those 60s or 70s cop dramas where the guy is maybe got his girl on the side, but he loves his job and he loves his car, and he's got one of these like souped up like Dodge Chargers or some ridiculous car from that era. And so you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep.
But somebody steals his car and he's got to go after the car. And it devolves from there. I don't know. That's what it felt like to me.
Yeah. I think that's probably true. I mean, I think clearly his first love is the general, and Annabelle is,
Well, and I think too we can see that from the fact that he really didn't stay and try to correct her much after the whole misunderstanding with him not trying to join up, and then him telling her the truth and him calling her a liar. And I don't really think he tried to dissuade her from that opinion too hard.
Well, what are you supposed to do there? You just continue to insist and dig your heels in? What are you, a Duncan?
Yes, in fact, I am.
At least for a little while longer. Did you know Buster Keaton wanted to use the real locomotive General, which was at the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Union Depot in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The railroad initially permitted him to do so, even providing him with a branch line to film on. But when it became known that the film was to be a comedy, the railroad withdrew permission and Keaton had to look elsewhere.
okay.
I don't know what the policy on filming and comedies or whether they were taken seriously was at the time. You would have thought that given Keaton's relative success with other films, that he would have a little bit more sway, but I don't know. And also, if you're loaning this out to Buster Keaton and you don't know it's a comedy, like, you're not doing your homework.
Honestly, I think at the time they were being so experimental with what they were actually putting out there. I don't know. It makes me curious because they were just trying to see what they could do with the film as an art form. I mean, Metropolis, I think, is a great example of that too. Of, it's really one of the first sci-fi films ever done, and this is like one of those mixed kind of films where they're just trying to figure out what the extent of this new form of art is going to be.
Did you know? The first try at getting the cannonball to shoot out of the cannon into the cab caused the ball to shoot with too much force. To cause it to shoot into the cab of the engine correctly, Buster Keaton had to count out the grains of gunpowder with tweezers.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now that's some precision, folks.
That's an understatement.
Did you know? The final battle scene sparked a small forest fire around the river. Buster Keaton, his crew, and the extras stopped filming to fight the fire.
Okay. They did use locals from the community, though, as extras, so that does make a little bit of sense.
Yes, we're getting to that, but it reminds me so much of the scene from Tropic Thunder where they're going to do the final, bombing run through the trees, and there's that just giant explosion, and everything had to be synced up so perfectly for them to get this one thing for all of the explosions to work. In 1927, you didn't have these tech crews with very specific regulations and everything else, and you set the forest on fire because only you can prevent forest fires.
Okay, Smokey.
Did you know? This film was selected into the National Film Registry in 1989, the first year of inductions, for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Ironically, by the 1950s, all prints of the film had been lost. However, in 1952, actor James Mason, having purchased Keaton's old house, found a copy in a hidden cupboard, after which copies and viewings could recommence. And similarly of Keaton's film, Our Hospitality, too. So, we're only able to watch this because of James Mason. And finally, did you know? Because of critical and financial failure on this film, producer and head of United Artists, Joseph M. Schenck, sold Keaton's contract to MGM, and Buster would never again have complete creative control over his films.
Yes.
Sometimes you are so ahead of your time, that it ends up biting you in the ass in the short term. But ultimately you win out.
Yeah. Makes you stop and think, though, if he'd actually had the ability or the chance to do other projects like this, what would have occurred and what quality we would have seen.
Well, he was also going through a divorce at the end of the 1920s, and he started drinking very heavily.
Yes, that old Hollywood chestnut. But that looks like a good spot for our first break. We'll be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 300th episode, we welcome back 5-time club member, the host and creator of the Best Picture cast, and a CLP contributor, Kieran B., to discuss the silent comedy classic Modern Times from 1936, celebrating its 90th anniversary. Written, directed, and music by Charlie Chaplin. Cinematography by Ira Morgan and Roland Tetherow. Editing by Charlie Chaplin with Willard Nico. Starring Charlie Chaplin, Paulette Goddard, Henry Bergman, Tiny Sanford, and Chester Conklin. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. And before we get too much further, Sarah, what is going on with you? What are you working on, and where can people find you?
Well, as always, people can find me on Instagram on my page at The Nomadic Archaeologist. I am prepping up, doing a bunch of research as I'm preparing to head to Greece. So there's going to be a bunch of updates regarding that and a bunch of excavations that we're visiting while we're gone. So I'm very much looking forward to, as one of my professors is actually going to be working on the excavation, an excavation that we're visiting.
The Digging Dynamo indeed. So that takes us to best performances, was where we left off. Dad, who did you have down?
Keaton.
Yeah. I'd love to hear the argument for anybody other than Keaton as the best performance. Again, this is a totalitarian kind of award, and that sounds terrible, but ultimately, writer, director, star, editor. So, I mean, he did just about as much as anybody has done for any one of their movies, with the exception being Chaplin basically did the same thing for most of his. So there must have been something about these silent film stars to make their own movies and the total control that they essentially had.
True. I think it was an element of control that they were starring, they were going to direct, and they were going to write and establish control over their character.
But is there anything specific to Keaton beyond just simply the amount of things he contributed to the film?
The athleticism throughout the film, the story itself, the pace of the film.
Arguably his creativity in all of this.
We did compliment him on his daring with all of the stunt work, as well as his comedic timing. I would really have a hard time really picking out anybody else beyond him, just because of how central he is to the plot, how little most of the other characters have to do in the movie overall. There's really only one other person that you could say lays a claim to much of anything, which is kind of why I felt like I almost needed to create. So this is the troubling part of this. This film has been reestablished and redone a couple of different times with different musical scores and the rest of it, which is why I originally had the musical score from the version I watched as my most charismatic, because I thought that was a good element to this movie. I think more of the creative work and the behind the scenes and the background and the technical, to me, it was part of the experience of watching this more than any of the other side actors or characters, which kind of took up space, to be quite honest. But because I didn't know what film score ended up being in the version that I watched, and since it's technically not original to the film because they've had multiple different scores, I had to also go with Keaton for most charismatic because, again, he's the most likable and affable character within this. He's the only one that you really know that you have any level of connection to in this film, because nobody else really gets much screen time per se. You get one other person and she feels kind of
Flat.
well, like she's not given really a whole lot to do.
Well, and beyond that, she's very much, I feel like, made as a one-dimensional character.
Well, they all are. That's why they're given names like Union General X. There's really no personality or life to any of this. It's just Keaton kind of doing his work.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, that works. I mean, it's a 70-minute film for a reason, or 75-minute film for a reason. So my best secondary performance on this one, and it's going to be a little odd. I hope that I got this right, that this is original to the actual film, but I went with the sound effects team. That had as much to do with some of the comedic timing as anything.
For me, I went with Devereaux Jennings and Burt Haynes, the cinematographers. Just the fact that they were able to set up the camera and get it to look as pleasing as they could, with constant movement and motion going on the screen, as well as some of the long camera angles of the scenes of the train and such. I thought they did a pretty admirable job of making sure the film looked good.
I can't disagree on that.
I actually had Marion Mack as Annabelle Lee. While she's not given a ton to do in this, she had to be willing to put herself in some very odd, somewhat dangerous situations. She'd never been in film or cinema before. The only reason that she was hired on this, from what I was reading online, is that the makeup artist was a friend of hers. And Buster Keaton had made it known to the cast and crew that he was looking for an old-fashioned looking woman, and this makeup artist recommended her friend. She was highly involved in a lot of the physical demands on set for a lot of these things, was more than willing to take part in these, but after the film, she actually retired from acting.
Well, that's because Keaton lied to her about all of the things that they were going to do on the movie.
Yeah. She thought it was boring. So she was done. It was too much work. So
she did end up becoming a screenwriter, didn't she?
Yeah, she wrote a few screenplays and then retired from that and became a real estate agent and used her Hollywood connections to sell half of Hollywood to all of the stars of the 30s and 40s.
So most charismatic for either of you?
I had Keaton.
You can't really go with anyone else.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, let's move to best scene then. I have 5 nominees here. I have Enlistment Office, I have Cannon Fodder, Escape from the House, Evading the Union, and The Final Battle. Do you have any other scenes to add? I know this covers probably 70% of the film.
I think you have it.
Okay. So then from these 5, what is the best scene?
I have Evading the Union. I think that's by far the most action, the most stunts, the most intricate placement, and everything about it. It puts Keaton in the limelight. There's a lot involved of his personal safety. It just, to me, is the heart of the film.
I used a lot of the same reasoning you gave, but I went with Cannon Fodder for the same reasons. And it's ultimately because I find that to be funnier and a little bit better executed, particularly for the ending sequence where you know that the cannon's about to go off, but you think it's going to explode on him. And instead, he has this great stroke of luck. So I just thought from the timing and the set design of all of that, I thought it was a better done scene, although I don't really have any problems with any of, I guess, with several of these being nominated for best scene.
Also had Evading the Union. I mean, it's creative, it's comedic. He times it very well. he brings these moments of light when in like a very kind of serious moment. There, you feel very well what you should be during the scene, and then he does these small things like pulling the top hat out of the cabin and putting it on his head in the middle of a chase scene. Like, it brings some sort of, I don't know, humor and light to what's going on screen, as well as providing just moments that are so unbelievably him, because you can't really see many other people at that time doing something similar. I love the scene of him pulling those logs off of the track and how he's running down that, and thinking also he ran in front of a freaking moving train in order to film these. Back to the end where Dad says he's jumping around from car to car and finally sits down on that back end and has his butt fall in. How can you not like take a moment because you finally relax a little bit and just create this moment of laughter in that moment of he finally made it through this whole fiasco and he's back on board and he's no longer jumping around, and he finally takes a seat and then falls in, and then he looks forward and there's smoke everywhere. It's one of my favorite scenes just for his comedic energy. He's very energetic throughout this scene and the way that he builds it.
Favorite scenes, I'll be honest, I have cannon fodder for favorite scene and most indelible moment. So anything else you guys kind of want to finish with here, you're welcome to.
I have favorite scene being Escape from the House, because I think it shows a little bit more of his abilities, his resolve, how he can take situations and try to utilize them to his advantage. I think it's kind of more or less his hero scene more than anything else. And for most indelible, I have Invading the Union for the same reasons I had it as my best scene.
The most indelible, I think I have to go with the final battle. I just can't get past the kind of plummet of the train into that, especially knowing like all of what he did in order to obtain that footage, how crazy expensive that was to be able to do. I mean, it's still one of the most expensive scenes in film history, I would argue, especially with inflation and accounting for that. And I think it is one of the most iconic scenes from the film, personally.
Fair enough. So that looks like a good spot for our second break. We'll be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, and before we get to the Stanley Rubric in a minute, if you're ever curious about our Master Greatest Movies of All Time list that has every graded movie we've ever discussed on the show, there's a link in the episode description of every episode of this show, or you can go to RonnieDuncanStudios.com and find it as the top entry on the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast show page. That has the grades we've done so far for all 270 movies we've graded, and we continue to add more each week. Make sure to check that out as we go and follow along. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes. Chuck Negrin, 83, American singer, founding member, and lead singer of Three Dog Night. Lamont McLemore, 90, American singer, member of the Fifth Dimension. And Brad Arnold, 47, American singer, lead singer of Three Doors Down, and songwriter, Kryptonite and Here Without You.
Apparently, it was a bad week for musicians and especially lead singers. My only relationship to anybody on this list is Brad Arnold, who, I enjoyed several of Three Doors Down's music. I don't know, I guess they had the ringtone for Allison for my brother, I guess now brother-in-law, for many, many years, but outside of that, I mean, it's not like Three Doors Down was a huge part of my playlist for a long time, and I had several of their songs in a rotation, but nothing of huge repute. And I guess
They were one of my first concerts.
I know one Three Dog Night song.
Yes.
And it's the exact one you would think I would know.
Jeremiah was a bullfrog.
It's called Joy to the World, but sure.
Okay. Written by Hoyt Axton.
Sure.
Three Dog Night was a little bit before my time. They really weren't very popular by the time I started really getting into music, and they didn't have a large staying power. The Fifth Dimension, I remember watching many times on various variety shows in the early 70s. So, they would be on Sullivan, they would be on, I'm trying to remember, Dean Martin, they would be on Carol Burnett, etc. So, I watched them perform many times.
And so we remember these here fondly for their contributions with a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. Okay, let's move to best funniest lines. I have two. One that I read at the beginning of the show and one other one. Johnnie Gray to the recruiter who rejects him. If you lose this war, don't blame me.
I have just the one. Captain Anderson. This girl was in the baggage car when we stole the train, so I thought it best to hold her.
Johnnie Gray. 3 men stole my general. I think they're deserters.
There's a reason why I only did 2. These are so bad.
Well, of course.
It's
a silent film.
Yeah, but even Sunrise had like more memorable dialogue than this. This is just so listless. All right, my only other one. Annabelle Lee. Did Johnny enlist? Her brother. He didn't even get in line. Her father. He's a disgrace to the South. Okay. Any others?
Nah.
Okay, let's move to the Stanley Rubric then. Legacy is up first. This is a measure of the legacy of the film approximately 5 years after it came out. So 1926 to like early 1932-ish territory. I know that math isn't mathing, but don't worry about it. It is roughly correct. Until today, what is the legacy of this film as shared between 2 equal yet separate groups, the industry and the audience, 5 and 5 points apiece for a total of 10. Dad, would you like to go first or second?
I'll go first. For legacy, it's well-renowned. It was on Roger Ebert's list. It was on Sight and Sound. It was Orson Welles' favorite. It is, if you watch silent films and you have appreciation for silent films, you're going to know about this film. So I'm going to get to that in a second. But for a legacy, I think Keaton had a resurrection in the 50s and became popular until his death. This thing is still held in some esteem. And of all the silent films, there's so many that are forgotten. This one seems to have staying power. So I'm at a 4 for the industry. For the public, no one sees this film except unless you've got to be a real hardened dyed in the wool cinephile. So I'm going to go with a 2 for the public. So I'm at a 6 overall.
You and I are not so different, yet again. I also have a 2 for basically the same reasons. Unless you're a deep-cut cinephile, you're probably not to have seen this one. So I'm going to guess only like half of the cinephiles have probably seen this. Silent film is not even that appealing to the deep cinephiles that watch a ton of shit. So with that, the only difference that we really have is I went to a 4.5. I couldn't go to a full 5 because this didn't beget a whole bunch of other films like it. This is like one of the last gasps before, because technically if it comes out in February of 1927, This is only a couple of months preceding The Jazz Singer and then the explosion of the talking film. So this is really like the end of the Keaton era and the end kind of silent film, and it just got in under the wire. And for that matter, like, Keaton doesn't go on to anything more significant past this point. This film initially was a flop. We didn't know that it even existed. It kind of came back around many decades later. So I can't give it the full 5, even as often as it's appeared on the Sight and Sound list, as often as it's appeared on some of the AFI lists. It's needed more time, and so I have this at a 4.5 there. I have a 6.5.
I had, very similar to you, I put it at a 4.5 for industry. There's just too many big people that really have connection to this in the industry. As far as audience, even as somebody who likes silent films myself, there's a lot of deeper cut films that I have seen, many that I haven't. I want to give this a 1.5 because, like, even people in my generation who do enjoy silent films or who try to go back to them to at least understand that era haven't really heard of this that much. So I find it hard to even necessarily leave it at a 2 because I honestly just don't know many people that know it at all. Even amongst people like myself who do enjoy Charlie Chaplin and, you know, many of the other great comedic silent films of the era. So
we have a 1.5 for the entire
and
category?
a 4.5.
Okay. So for a
6.
There you go. Although you're not Sarah, but whatever.
Just helping with the math.
That is a 6.17 average between the three of us. Dad, do you want to reveal what the findings of the world-famous office poll were today?
No one had heard of it.
You didn't ask the question.
You did.
I know, I had to ask it after the fact.
Yeah, well.
Anyway, you better ask it next week or someone's going to be very disappointed in you.
Who is that?
The person who said that we absolutely 100% needed to keep that segment on the show. Our guest for next week.
Okay.
Let's move to impact and significance. This is a measurement within the initial 5 years of the same two groups. What is the impact and significance among the audience and the industry for the initial 5 years? So roughly 1926 to 1932. That's what we're measuring here. Dad, since you went first the last time, I guess I will go first here. This is initially a flop. The biggest industry wave is that I think we move away from this kind of filmmaking and this kind of style. I don't think we had this many high production action set piece films for quite a number of years. Everything was much more contained and more confined. They were interested in spending less on the overall production. We didn't really get great epics and nothing with really moving vehicles of this kind of variety for a number of years, probably even into the 70s, I would guess, or at least the 60s, because I can't really recall anything that has like a major chase scene or this kind of level of action for
Ben-Hur.
Okay, so that's 59. That's the late, like you're getting it just in under the 60s, but we're talking 3 decades later. So the biggest thing to the industry, I think, is that it was a flop, and ultimately that Keaton basically stopped making movies, had no real creative control. So I'm going to give that a 2, but partially influenced by a negative impact and significance. And it didn't feel like it was impressive to the crowd. Again, the only copy of this film that existed, seemingly, was the one he kept for himself at his house because he loved what he did on this movie. If not for Keaton preserving basically this for himself because he felt like it needed to be out there, we wouldn't even have this film to talk about. So from that standpoint, I'm going to give it a 1. I have a 3 here.
Impact, we never really say impact as being always positive. I gave it a 3.5 for impact for the industry because it destroyed Keaton and it wiped out a lot of the large budget films for a decade, 2 decades, as you indicated. So I have a 3.5. For significance for the public, it did make $1 million. There weren't that many films that were making that kind. I can't go as low as 1.5. And it did have staying power around that time when it was released, at least for a period of a year or two. So I'm at a 2.5, a 6 overall.
It's way too high.
I actually agree that that's kind of high. This, as you've both said, has a negative impact on the industry overall. He really didn't do much after this. The industry kind of completely reversed the idea of doing these big budget movies, as we've discussed. Ben-Hur's kind of like a one-off at that.
No, because it was followed up by Spartacus and several other films in that era. He is correct now that I'm considering it, but it still took many years to get to that point again.
Well, even so, I really can't put it any higher than like a 2. Now, as far as like significance with the people that saw it at the time, that is right. It did make $1 million. That was internationally making $1 million. I mean, gross sales in the United States weren't like super high. It lost a lot of money. I mean, the train scene alone was like a $700,000 budget. So I'll give it a 1.5 and come in at 3.5 for the whole category.
You got to ruin the good math here. Both times.
Sorry.
It is a 4.17. Moving on to novelty. This is a measurement of anything original about the property or about the film. Could be the story, it could be the actors, it could be any number of things. And the execution on that originality, or just the execution in general. 5 and 5 points apiece for a total of 10. I guess I'll go first again here. I don't think that this is the most original thing. Knowing what I do about silent film and comedic stunts and such, maybe they weren't to this scale of dealing with a moving train in this way, but they certainly weren't shy about some various different stunt work and things that they were doing. We've mentioned Chaplin. Chaplin has some big set pieces in a few of them. Modern Times is one, although that comes several years after this. He has done some different things there. Harold Lloyd, I think, has that clock tower scene that's very famous. And so that's kind of got similar stunt work. They did some creative things on this. I also think that it's not necessarily inventive for Keaton. I have nothing to really found this on, since this is the only Keaton film that I'm aware of. But given that he has several films of a similar ilk, and in the same way that Chaplin is like redoing The Tramp every time he creates a movie, basically, I have to imagine that Keaton is kind of creating a very similar character because it's translatable from film to film to film. And as such, I put this at like a 3. Not the most original, but not like rehashed by any measure. I think this is a well-executed film, though. I think the sound effects, depending on which score you ended up watching, I think the cinematography is very good. The stunt work, the production design, the sets, even the costuming was relatively pretty good on this. So I have really nothing to complain about here. The only thing that I would say is just it loses a few things in the lack of dialogue and kind of a general story with any real supporting characters, because they were all kind of wooden and paper thin. And this really is about Keaton and his train for the most part, with one kind of supporting character and the rest just being nameless, faceless caricatures within this film. So I have a 3 for the originality. I have a 4.5 for the execution for a 7.5.
I have a 3.5 for originality. The sheer scale of what was being done made it more original than most dramas and such, or even comedies at that point in time. And the fact that as far as execution itself, I understand your point about the wooden nature of some of the sub characters and such, but this was Buster Keaton being Buster Keaton, and he was the center. So I'm not going to give it points down for that. I'm going to say it's a 5, so I'm at an 8.5 because I really think the film was novel and extremely well executed, especially in light of some of the stunts and other things that were done. So I'm at an 8.5.
I have it at a 4 for originality. As I've said before, a lot of silent filmmakers, and I can see this reflected in Keaton, were just experimenting with what they could actually do and accomplish on film. He was daring, he was willing to go the extra mile and just see what he could make himself do, what he was capable of capturing on film. And for that, it is incredibly, I feel, impactful and significant. It allowed the genre to continue doing, granted, much later because, of the failure of this to gain notoriety. These big budget films later on kind of took up that mantle of being, oh, we can actually accomplish this grand idea. So for that, I gave it a 4. For Buster Keaton's role, you can't. I couldn't choose anything lower than a 4.5. I didn't want to necessarily give him a 5 for it because I do think that he himself was doing a lot of the background work, and I don't think that this is even his most seminal work, though I haven't really seen much of his stuff. From everything that I know about him, this is not like the epitome of who he was as an actor. And for that, I will come in at an 8.5.
So yet again, ruining the great little numbers that we have, coming in with an 8.17.
I just enjoy making you do math, Thomas.
I'm not so much annoyed at the math as the fact that we've now had 3 categories with 0.17.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's move to classicness. This is a measure of how well the film has aged or not. We usually start at a slightly higher average baseline of 6 due to the increasing nature by which you can easily take points off for how poorly things age over time and how ungracefully we allow things to age over time. And very few opportunities to usually age something up, although we've certainly found a way. So this category completely lives in the gray, so we turn to our senior nuance correspondent, Dana.
I would have to indicate that I gave it points up because the stunts, the magnitude of using real trains for the filming and having them running while you're filming, having all that stuff, makes it cutting edge. I think that part holds up. A little bit the rah-rah the South. Yeah, well, okay. I understand the times, so I'm not going to give any points down for that. Actually, Annabelle does quite a bit in the film as far as stunts herself, or at least is on the train doing some things and kind of helping. So it's not like she's completely, it's not the true damsel in distress concept. So I'm going to give that another half point up. So I am going to go with a 8.5 overall.
So I would argue that the use of trains belongs in the execution side of Novelty and has no business being in Classicness, but yet again, we ignore the rules and the gray because somebody likes to bend all of the categories, much like SCOTUS bends their decisions. But anyway, I digress.
Well, no, you don't. You just love to poke.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, well.
God forbid somebody poked back.
Well, and to be fair, you poke me more than I poke you. Do you need help with the math? Being one.
Okay.
Anyway, I have -1 for this being a silent film because I don't think that ages well with the general public. You could say that that might be going into a little bit of rewatchability, but I'm going to leave it here for right now. -1 for not a lot of dialogue. I don't think that particularly ages well as far as the attention span and the audience medium for this. You have to pay more attention to this, even though it's a little bit shorter. I will get back to short when we get to rewatchability. I have -1 for a patriarchal patronage that is quite evident in this film. The Civil War was 60 years difference. And so we're talking the difference between where we're at currently and the 1960s. So basically, what the civil rights era was for us in the modern day, the Civil War was for when this movie was made, just for context. So with that, they understood in the time that this was made a certain different male-female gender relationship. There were certain gender dynamics that are quite apparent and quite different in this movie. So that's still on the table. I would, however, give a +2 for timelessness because there is a lot about this movie that I think is ahead of its time in that regard and ages particularly well. So the cinematography is one. I think some of the stunt work is well ahead of its time and deserving of some additional praise. But the part that I'm going to really help boost this film is that, to me at least, and I am the self-proclaimed comedy snob here, this is still funny. That is an element of classicness. Does this still make you emotional in the right spots? Does it still make you laugh in the spots that it's supposed to? And ultimately, for me, that's a +2. So I'm at a 7 here.
Well, as shocking as it might be, I actually came in at a 7 too, Thomas. I thought that it's ahead of its time. I mean, for the sheer fact that Annabelle isn't sitting by the sidelines and is actually, participating, she's throwing logs into the fire, she's doing, moving around the trains, being part of the action. That to me was like one thing that's very uncommon for the era. Then, just how well this ended up kind of coming back and received in later times. I did also downvote for Rah Rah South, though that was common in the 20s. I still think that is a very hard thing to kind of accept from a modern lens. But you are completely right. This is something that I think the average viewer is still going to resonate with, is still going to laugh at, even if they're going into this completely blind. And I would argue, even for silent films, there's very little dialogue, as you put it. There's not a lot of substance where that is. So this is all like in the moment kind of things. And it can be hard to follow if you're not used to that.
So finally, we break our streak, and that's a 7.5 between the three of us. A more moderate number. Finally, we get to rewatchability. Please insert your own subjective test here. We'll turn to our guest first, as we usually do.
I would actually rank this at probably about an 8 for myself. This is one that I would definitely go back to as kind of a fun alternative to a classic film. This is one that I will definitely enjoy more than once, especially because I already watched it a second time in preparing for the show. I do downvote it a little bit because I am not the normal. I do know that this is something that most definitely I will not be able to get my partner to watch. He will completely lose track of what is going on after about 5 minutes because of the lack of dialogue. And I know that silent films aren't just a normal part of the vogue. So while it is rewatchable for me, I know that that's not common for everybody. So I'll actually shift that down a little bit and say I'll give it a 7.
Dad, would you like to go or do you want me?
Go ahead.
As most people know who've been listening to the show for the past year plus, I've tried to downshift into what the original conception of the category was supposed to be, which is a more objective point of view on a general audience, whether this would be rewatchable. And so as such, I think the fact that it's short actually does help it a bit. I think that it's a comedy helps it a little bit. But you can't get away from the fact that it's black and white, it's silent, and it's old. All things that would make it difficult for somebody to watch the first time, and I think would be held against it in any sort of rewatchable category. So from that standpoint, I have it at a 4.
Okay. I've seen it now twice. I would watch it again. If I'd never see it again, it's not going to be that big a deal. But trying to get other people to watch it's going to be difficult. So I'm at a 4.5.
You had to. And we're back to the 0.717s again.
At this point, next time I come on, I'm just going to make my numbers always a 0.5 to give you hatred of math.
Well, that is not going to necessarily work for you or work against you because you would have to anticipate what our numbers are going to be ahead of time. This is more that we had a good round number and then somebody puts a 0.5 at the end of it to make the math not quite add up right. So it's a 5.17 between the three of us. For audience score on this one, we had an 84% for Google users and a 92% for Rotten Tomato users, giving us an 8.8. So to recap the categories, we had a 6.17 for legacy, a 4.17 for impact and significance, an 8.17 for novelty, a 7.5 for classicness, a 5.17 for rewatchability, and an 8.8 for audience score, giving us a final total of 39.98, and currently placing it on our list between
around 210
between Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and The Natural for number 127. Excuse me, 227. My bad.
Okay. So I wasn't far off.
So, as usual, if you have any commentary for us, and I would actually like to encourage everyone out there, if you're an avid listener or not, please, if you get us on social media or have the video up on YouTube, give us a bunch of thumbs downs. Apparently, negative energy and negative comments actually fuel the algorithm to increase our numbers. So if you really want to do that, we would appreciate your negativity. But you can otherwise contact us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on our website, RonnieDuncanStudios.com, or at our handle at GModePodcast on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, TikTok, Threads, and Blue Sky. All right, moving on to remaining questions for this one. First one I have, and this annoyed me. How do neither of them have any injuries from the frickin' bear trap? The bear trap would have, snapped the ankle in half.
Just saw it more of, the James Bond-esque kind of crap where, you can roll out of any situation.
Yes,
Okay.
I oftentimes think of Buster Keaton and James Bond in the same thought.
80s Bond. Oh, God. Whoever was the director for all 5 80s films was the most watched director I had last year because we were doing that project. He had 5 films. Ugh. 2. Does Johnny marry Annabelle?
I don't know. Does he get to take the general home too, or
How do you make that a part of your foreplay?
blowing off steam?
Okay, that, oh my God.
Could stoke her fire.
He festooned her?
That's a good word.
She gains weight. It does come with a cow catcher.
He has to give her furnace more wood?
Mm-hmm. And ultimately, he would be doing the railing.
It's fair. That's fair. Finally, how long before Johnny is killed in battle?
I was trying to place about when this would have taken place. They were near Chattanooga. So if we're talking about the Battle of Chattanooga, this would have been about Chickamauga or the Battle of Chattanooga. So that would have been 1863, 1864. So it would have been at this point in time, he would have been defending on the march through Georgia. So who knows? He might have survived, because all those guys did at that point in time was get out of the way, because they weren't stopping General Sherman.
Yeah, I suppose if all he needs to do is run away, we've already seen Buster Keaton be very effective at that. If he has to stand and fight, he is going to die immediately.
Yeah.
So, any other remaining questions for this one?
Nope.
Did they ever fish the general out of the river?
Well, the general was not the one that went into the river. That was a different train.
But that train stayed in the river until 1944, when War Services grabbed it, scrapped it out because they needed the steel for the war effort.
They filmed this in Oregon, I should mention. Yes. And I think that's the only place where there's like a statue or something to commemorate Keaton anywhere, is where they roughly filmed this in Oregon. All right, hearing none, I want to thank our guest for being on with us again. Sarah, you're not currently scheduled to be back with us for a few months. You have Legally Blonde coming up in July, which is probably a little bit more fun and a little more fitting. But please remind the people what you're working on and where they can find you.
Well, I've got my upcoming trip to multiple archaeological sites, which if you want to talk about mythology or anything in regards to ancient history, I will be photographing and posting about updates on as we go in April and into May. Other than that, I've been working in the background on a couple different projects and am hoping to publish a paper soon on use of ancient Greek mythology as a backing for Nazism.
I'm sure that's just such a hot button topic these days.
Amongst historians, it actually is. We've been talking a lot for about the last 4 or 5 years in regards to fascism and ancient Rome.
Fascinating. Utterly fascinating.
I have my own archaeological expedition planned. I'm going to see what further things your mother's going to try to give me that are more than 2 years out of date.
Would you like to explain that joke a little further? Because it didn't quite land. Do you mean all of the things from the back of the fridge that she's now giving you to try?
Well, some of that, but I mean, she did give me a bottle of water a few months ago where I tasted it and it was like chunky. It was like protein water, and it was expired like 3 years before.
Was it one of those like smart waters or something?
Yeah, something like that.
I wonder if she got that out of my...
I don't know. She said she found it in a bag and thought it was fine, so she just put it in the fridge and gave it to me when... And then, of course, she laughs about it because she thinks it's funny, and, you know...
This is how I know I'm my mother's daughter.
This is why women like true crime more than men. It gives them ideas.
Yeah.
Anyway, Dad, remaining thoughts for the week.
I have been working through as many of the nominated films as I can. I actually got to see Hamnet. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic.
Well, you save. We have an episode coming up.
So I've been through a couple of the short live actions. I got all the short animateds done. So I've been going through and doing one film here or there, trying to do one every other day about. On weekends, I'm trying to get a couple in on each of the 2 days so that I'm actually on time to have everything, not rushing around at the last minute.
Fair enough. Now, I did suggest this to you because I think it would be an opportune moment to showcase your eventual TikTok series that apparently you're just never going to get around to doing, but I binged the entire season of The Lincoln Lawyer over the weekend because, of course, I did.
Yeah.
So that was fun, although there were many moments, not from experience, but just, and I've only taken criminal law as a class. I've not taken criminal procedure. I've definitely not taken evidence yet. So there are many parts to me that this is still somewhat foreign, but even I started to speak up and say there were things that would never happen. So if the mood strikes you ever, it is currently the #1 watch show on Netflix.
Okay.
It's out there. There are many opportunities like this.
I know. I
The
will.
people want to hear. The people want to hear.
Yeah. All right.
But otherwise, that looks like a good spot for us this week. Thank you for listening. I do wish we could chat longer, but I'm having an old friend for dinner. Next week, for our 300th episode, we welcome back 5-time club member, the host and creator of the Best Picture cast, and a CLP contributor, Kieran B., to discuss the silent comedy classic Modern Times from 1936, celebrating its 90th anniversary. Written, directed, and music by Charlie Chaplin. Cinematography by Ira Morgan and Roland Tetherow. Editing by Charlie Chaplin and Willard Nico. Starring Charlie Chaplin, Paulette Goddard, Henry Bergman, Tiny Sanford, and Chester Conklin. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at RonnieDuncanStudios.com or at GreatestAllTimeMoviePodcast@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, TikTok, Threads, or Blue Sky at the handle @GMOPodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our distributor is Captivate FM. Our technical provider is Riverside FM.